morning, everybody. Welcome to day 2 of AgeSong's 2014-2015 new Intern Orientation. Woo! Yeah, great. Okay, well, as I said, Christina and I are going to be your speakers for this morning, and we are covering 2 topics today. We are covering first, professional expectations, and then second, a little brief overview of paperwork. So to start out with, we thought it'd be good to do a little exercise and just have people kind of, shout out what they think of when they hear the phrase professional expectations or professionalism, or the word professionalism. What comes to mind?
Ethics. Appropriate dress. I think responsibility. Timeliness.
For corporate culture.
And I also heard timeliness.
Thank you. Yeah. Communication. Respectful language.
Keeping the silliness within bounds.
That's a good way of putting it. It's not that it's not okay to be silly, but there's a certain filter it has to pass through, yeah?
Boundaries.
It's a very important one.
Be reliable. Communication.
Standard of competence.
Procedures and protocols.
My favorite thing ever. If everything had a procedure, protocol, everything would be perfect. That's my opinion.
Only life for that neat, right?
I know. Remembering that everybody doesn't have the same basic assumptions that you do.
Make it acronym. No, don't. Just write it out.
Yeah. That was something very little.
I like that reframe. It was good.
Team player.
Team player. I guess confidentiality comes to mind.
Self-care, first and foremost.
That's a good one to have up there. I feel like that wouldn't get put up on this list a lot, but it is important.
Scope of practice. Scope of practice.
All right.
Anything else?
Respect for colleagues.
Respect.
Respect for colleagues.
I think also like knowing when you need to speak to your supervisor for like guidance or input.
Okay.
Confidence.
Confidence.
Okay. This is a pretty good list so far. Is there any last minute entries before we start to discuss it a bit?
I don't know consultation is the same thing as
Yeah.
Consultation?
How about position or job expectations, like a job description? That way everyone knows what's what.
So, AgeSong, I would include, might not be relevant in some settings, but awareness of the milieu and like the context. Yeah.
Respectful is up there. Respect and dignity. But for the elders and for the.
Does this list feel complete to y'all? So we have accepting variability in perceptions, self-care, corporate culture, ethics, awareness of the milieu, timeliness, open communication, appropriate dress, responsibility, respectful language, respect and dignity for self and elders, appropriate and reasonable silliness, job expectations, boundaries, reliability, consultation, competence, confidence, seeking guidance, confidentiality, being a team player, procedures and protocols, respect for colleagues, and scope of practice.
Fulfillment of obligations.
Say trustworthy.
Can't think of the word, but it's opposite team player, like knowing, being able to work alone, being able to initiative when needed.
Autonomy.
Is that what you mean, autonomy?
Yes. Sorry.
Sorry, didn't mean to.
Oh, no.
Integrity. Yeah. And trust, definitely.
Integrity. So managing and working with one's own projections, affects.
Was flexibility up there?
Flexibility?
That's a good one.
That's a good one.
Flexibility is key.
For me, it's always been the key.
Yeah. Don't want to get too fixed.
I like the word accommodating.
Accommodating. Anything else? So I'm looking at this list and I'm wondering how many of us have very different ideas and definitions of some of these words? And I'm wondering if any of you can think of a time where, in your mind, you had a definition of, let's say, respect for colleagues. And you have in your mind what that looks like and what that feels like and how that might present itself in the workplace. But have any of you ever come across a situation where there was an issue between you and another person, and at the end of the discussion or the situation, you realized that you two had different, very different definitions of respect or reliability or communication or any of these words?
And to add on to that, if that happened to you, how did you end up, or how did you, or how would you end up resolving a situation like that, where there's a conflict between someone and it turns out that you guys are coming from two different sorts of perspectives on things? How would one manage a conflict of that nature?
I was going to say that sometimes the way people communicate respect, like one of the things I found is sometimes across culture or gender or even within like socioeconomic class expresses differently. The language that's used, the posture, all of that stuff is very different. And so I've oftentimes found that it's like I'll start seeing things that, like in one setting I was seeing things from somebody who was starting to seem kind of put off in the middle of the conversation. I'm like, okay, I'm obviously communicating in a way that's not getting across what I'm trying to. Right. And rather than trying to put it off on, oh, well, that's them, instead I was like, I need to like open it up and say, I think this is landing like a lead brick and I'm wondering what you're experiencing right now. And being open to hearing that maybe there's a way in which I'm using language that they hear differently, or that I'm like the way I'm speaking, eye contact, anything like that, like something about it's not sitting quite right, so I can effectively get across what I'm trying to get across.
So I'm hearing there's pieces of, in a situation like that, giving someone the benefit of the doubt, being open and being curious about how they're experiencing you, and kind of open to hearing about that.
And also realizing that someone may just be having a day and it might have nothing to do with me, so it's not all about me too.
The one I'm thinking of is open communication. I remember one position where I thought I was communicating enough through like emails and leaving messages on my supervisor's voicemail. But her idea of communication is actually reaching her on the phone, not just leaving a message, being able to reach me at all times, including weekends and evenings, and just constant reminders of my schedule, of what I'm doing. And so our idea of open communication was very different, where I thought I was communicating enough, and she thought I wasn't communicating enough. Okay. I mean, we had to sit down and kind of define it for each other, right? Yeah, and set some boundaries, because I didn't know I was supposed to be reached on weekends. So, yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to point out, it sounded like there was also a difference in boundaries in that whole interaction. And also just the idea that a lot of conflict or misunderstanding can arise when people don't kind of set these things up. And also the fact that it seems like everyone, despite the fact that we all name these words and we all agree that these are professional expectations, people have different definitions about what that would look like. But since you brought up the topic of boundaries, and it is such an important thing, what are professional boundaries? What do those look like? What are professional boundaries between you and the residents, between you and each other, between you and your supervisors, between the admin staff, and all that?
I brought that word up because when I work, in terms of my supervisor and I had different notion of boundaries in terms of dealing with the tenants that we work as a case manager and SRO, and so mine was sort of what I like here, which is the authenticity and just sort of just being real, and hers was sort of the flat affect, clinical and a lot of diagnoses, and because this person is this, you can't talk to them this way. So, those type of different notions. And then I think depending on the place where you're at in terms of dealing with supervisors, or it depends on the culture of the place. So I think you have to find that out and really really know that. And I think with open communication, talk about it. Say, what are the expectations here? What do you expect of me?
I think boundaries. What came to mind was with clients, of course, no having sex or relationships with clients, and also about gifts. No accepting gifts. Well, I guess it depends on what you mean by gifts. So if a client wants to give you like a handmade type of card or something that maybe you're doing in session, then I personally think that's okay. But I know when I was leaving my facility, I had a client who wanted to give me like this heart necklace. There's a lot behind that, but I'm like, okay, no, thank you. Just kind of have him visit the things that we've done in session and how I hold that with like a lot of value. So being able to have boundaries there.
But that can really, you know, vary by the individual too, and the individual's own resources. I mean, just for example, if say Picasso was here and he wanted to do a drawing for you or something like that, could you accept that? Knowing that the value of it. So I think that it's a floating target in a sense, and I think I go back to what you said. You really have to understand what that corporate culture is, because that corporate culture is going to really set the standards and the boundaries for not only the way you behave, but what your competence expectations are too.
Thank you. I was going to say the same thing, that you're right. Some of these things, there are hard and fast boundaries that we have. I mean, we all know the big phrase, right? In fact, you're going to sign the paper. If you haven't already, professional therapy never involves sex. However, there are other boundaries that are more kind of looser or tighter depending on the place that you're working in, what the culture of it is. Granted, you do kind of, as clinicians, as mental health workers, we are responsible for kind of keeping our ethical code in mind and making sure that we're staying on the right side of that. At the same time, you know, as life generally tends to be, so many things don't fall into categories of black and white, but stay in the middle of shades and gray. And tying it back to it, that's where open communication and, you know, talking it out with people, kind of figuring out, identifying what this is, like being transparent and kind of saying, I've noticed this, what do you think about this, how do I deal with that? That's where all this stuff is really important. Another thing that I wanted to bring up and see what everyone thought about was the idea of, where'd it go? There it is. Scope of practice. What is maintaining an appropriate scope of practice mean? Or what does scope of practice bring up in general?
Well, for instance, it's like we have education on medication, but in truth we don't, you know, that is more like a thing like, being willing to be curious or have a conversation with the doctor, not trying to tell the doctor what the prescription should be, because they actually are MDs, they were trained in it, and even if we have a lot of knowledge, we still aren't trained in it in the way that they are.
Or you could say that, you know, the orientation here I understand is humanistic, so I wouldn't necessarily want to bring a behavioralist type of orientation to a client in a humanistic type of setting, so that could be confusing.
I've had an issue with scope of practice working with breast cancer survivors as a peer counselor, a helpliner. I really understand the medicine of it after 10 years, but I have no business talking about it. And I have to be really careful to, you know, tell them everybody is different. Did you ask your doctor? And really make sure that I stay within the scope.
And Ava, you had something to say earlier?
Yeah, I think it's within what you're trained to do. So that's just good practice. And what you're licensed to do. That's how I've seen it. I just in terms of boundaries, I don't want to all say that. Oh, that means that you can do anything, just in being real. But you have appropriate boundaries with some people have different notions of them.
Some of these things can be a real gray area. You know, not only are you dealing with the reality that you and I might have very different definitions of these words, but we have to understand that AgeSong is a very different setting than where probably most of us have come from prior to being here. A lot of us might have come from substance abuse treatment centers or medical backgrounds in medical companies and organizations. And so at AgeSong, it is very humanistic, and so you do have, the relationships here are very different. You're seeing these residents every single day. even if you don't see your particular resident every day, you are seeing them every day, and this is their home. So you're not seeing them 1 hour a week because they come into your office for treatment or for a session. And so it's very different, it's a different type of relationship with someone who you see when they're sick. You might be seeing them literally as they're dying. You're seeing their family. You're seeing them their good days, their bad days. You're seeing them all day. You're here 8 hours, and you might see them 4 or 5 times a day. So you have a very different understanding of each other than if you were, again, only to see them 1 hour a week. You're sitting across the room from you, and you're having the CBT, or you're having this very traditional form of type of relationship and connection with them. And so that's why we really want to talk about the professional expectations here, because you do need to hold the fact that you all are clinicians. No matter what your particular degree is, you're all clinicians, and there are standards for our practice here. As clinicians, there's certain things that you can and cannot do. And that's a reality you have to hold on one end. And then on the other hand, you have to hold the reality that you're dealing with someone who you might remind them of their loved one. And they might want to come up to you and give you a hug. So what do you do with that? Because at AgeSong, we really honor the reality of wherever the rest of it is. And if they need some type of sort of comfort, whether it's holding a hand or it's leaning on you, you not only have to deal with whatever your personal boundaries are and your personal feelings about that, but also what the needs of the resident is. And so that's where you might get into some gray areas about what is appropriate and what's not appropriate.
A good example would be the use of touch. So generally in your average, I don't know, clinical situation in an office, in any other place that you possibly work, what would be the blanket statement on the use of touch?
Try to avoid it.
Yeah, like handshakes, but that's,
Mm-hmm. Right? In general, yeah, exactly. We try and kind of really hold that firm boundary of, I mean, even the idea of whether or not it's okay to give someone a hug in a session not is really something you have to think long and hard about, to think about what the hug means to you, what it means to the person, how they're going to react to it, what they're coming in with, what their level of boundaries are. It's a very, very complicated thing. But here, what do you imagine the use of touch would be with our residents?
Probably very therapeutic to some.
Mm-hmm.
A hug would be something that they probably would do more than 2 hours of talking to them.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean, in particular, like even in the literature, from what's the word I'm looking for here? Evidence-based standpoint, in this particular population with these folks, actually the use of touch can go a long way. The use of appropriate touch, I like to say that right out. But the use of touch can go a long way. Physical contact can bond you to someone and can make them feel heard and understood much more than sitting there and, as you said, talking to them for 2 hours.
Yes, last night I had 2 clients where at the end they wanted to hug, and it was 2 different times, but it was almost as if the ethical consideration was how long a hug. And in both cases, the hug was, quite powerful, but also very tight. And, for me at that point, it was feeling it, and then at a certain point, it's like, okay, this is about how long it feels right. And then, I gently pulled away where I could see that they could have stayed with it much longer. How that decision was made is interesting, and I'm trying to look at, because it probably says as much about me as about them, but that was more the consideration than not hugging at all.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. In the different situation, your consideration of the ethical issue of touch changes and takes on the qualities of, I guess, this particular setting in the population. So you're
I was going to say, growing up and coming of age out in the regular world, touch was always something that said, 2 people touch, it says, we exist. We care about each other. And then I think, being trained, we took more of a Victorian stance to say, maybe it's too difficult to figure out what's proper, what's improper. We'll just say it's all improper. And I think that's like a cop-out. I think, I think what you have the training and the intelligence to figure out what's proper, what's not.
I think a lot of it's intuition too, like using the ethics that you've learned in training and then really using your intuition and feeling what that touch means, what is appropriate, what are you comfortable with, and what is best for the resident, in your judgment at that moment. But I know that's been, like actually like being here too, are you okay with a hug? And what kind of hug? A side hug or like, you're fine. There's lots of different ways to still acknowledge the desire for connection on the part of resident and maintain your own comfort. But then also keeping in mind, one thing I like with diagnoses that there's a disinhibition. We're going to get technical diagnoses with a lot of residents, and you might, as a clinician, might not be comfortable with the disinhibition. And so, there's ways to be warm and comfortable yourself, and I think that's the biggest thing to navigate. Yeah, it's just I don't know, for me, intuition is one of the biggest.
Since you bring it up, and I know you in particular have had experience with this, maybe tell a little bit more about what exactly you're referring to. Just kind of, yeah.
So if we're getting clinical too, if you think about frontal temporal forgetfulness, there's a disinhibition, especially around sexuality, and so a lot of residents here, and I guess we've talked about this. Yeah, it happens to both genders and all ages, and will be disinhibited in their appreciation of the physical form. And so it's definitely happened. There's a particular resident here, and we have conversations about butts all the time, and he really much likes them. But you can have a conversation about, hey, that doesn't make me feel respected when you mention mine or another woman. We can talk about that, and just really naming it when it comes up is really important. And keeping your own boundary. And it's been something at first it was hard for me to reconcile, and I didn't know what to do about it, but it's the kind of thing that's easy. Or if someone wants to give you a kiss, making sure you can turn a cheek, or you can give a hand for a kiss, instead of a cheek. And you can still honor their desire to share affection without crossing your own physical boundaries and maintaining respect and naming in the moment. Because they're disinhibited, that naming might not be happening in their personal reality, so you can be the voice for that too, in a respectful way.
And what I like about what you're saying is that it's not just, so yes, we started out this saying that this is a place in which, unlike lots of places, physical touch is something that may be warranted and actually really beneficial for residents. However, that doesn't mean that if you are someone that is uncomfortable with it, that you have to immediately go out and start, touching and hugging everyone. And, ultimately, as Kyria is saying, it's a combination of what's needed in the situation plus your own boundaries. And perhaps maybe it's something that you have an opportunity to kind of think about and work on this year, or something that you're completely uncomfortable with, not like to do. But I guess the idea is knowing what your boundaries are, knowing what's going to be coming at you and what's okay, and then figuring out some way to kind of navigate that in a nice, gentle, therapeutic sort of way. Yes?
So going off of the spec, for me personally, I would think if I'm getting to know a resident, I would ask if they're comfortable with being touched, as opposed to just walking up to them and hugging them, because we don't know, what state of mind they're in. We don't know their comfort level. So while we have our own boundaries, I think the residents have their own boundaries.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thank you for saying that. That's absolutely fantastic. You want to test this out with people. There is no blanket sort of boundary for people. So there's a thing of, hey, can I touch you on the shoulder gently? Can I give you a hug? Can I hold your hand? Or with nonverbal residents, then it's really paying attention to the cues. Someone wants to hold your hand, if they're kind of sticking out, reaching towards you, you can feel comfortable to grab it, or pat them, or whatever you would feel comfortable doing. Yes. So touch and boundaries.
It's a big topic.
Mm-hmm. And, it's a work in progress, like anything else. This is an orientation. We just really have time to kind of just introduce and put this out there for you all to think about. This is something that can be fine-tuned, and I'm sure we'll talk about more in future trainings and in supervisions, in group supervisions and all that such. But before we move on to paperwork, there was one more thing I felt that was important to talk about, and that is this right here. Kind of hard to read because it's going up in reverse, but it is confidentiality. Confidentiality. Normally it's really easy, right? See someone in office, you don't talk about it to people that aren't there unless it's another therapist and you're consulting with them, or an insurance provider and you need to provide them information in order to meet the requirements of the third party provider, or if the court sends you some sort of subpoena, right? This setting is different. We're in a milieu, so how can you imagine confidentiality may get grayed or blurred in this sort of setting that we'll all be working in?
I mean, there's the fact that we're meeting them out just in open areas, but on top of that, we also have to think about like what's important information that care partners need to know. Like if we notice someone mentions they're not feeling well or something's happening, while we're talking to them, we can't just not tell anyone something like this.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to figure out how much is appropriate and necessary to let another staff member know, and how much of that is just like stays in the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Or just take a need to know credo.
Yeah.
Real simple, need to know. What do you need to really know about that?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. What would a nursing person need to know? What would a care partner need to know? What does the executive director need to know? Yeah. What does the wellness director need to know? Things like that. Gero?
This was something that came up with one of my residents at the end of last year, so a couple weeks ago, talking about with new interns coming in. I was just asking her, like, what sort of advice would she give and what would she say? And she brought up the fact that it's really, for some of the residents that are less forgetful, they're very aware that we're here, that we're interns, and that we have training together and group supervision together where we talk about them. And she was sort of just expressing how difficult that is. Like, she's like, I'm supposed to feel comfortable telling you all my secrets, and then you're going to go tell them to all these other people that I see all around on a daily basis and also know me. And so it was this like really beautiful conversation. And she'd been talking with another resident about how uncomfortable this is and how they didn't necessarily feel as open, because that's what we talked a lot about. And I was like, so just keeping in mind too, of like what you share, like is it even within our community, even though that is like under the umbrella of confidentiality by the ethical, that we can talk with other, colleagues, keeping in mind that you're in someone's home. So if you're telling someone about another resident, make sure it is for their therapeutic benefit, or it is really case consultation. And something another intern and I last year did was we sort of gave energetic nicknames to our residents, so that if we were discussing them, we weren't using their name, because everyone here knows everyone else. And so we were saying, even if it's something like, oh, are you meeting with so-and-so? Something as simple as that, we would name them, we had names like philosophy and headphones and troubadour, and like things that really spoke to their
I'm trying to figure out who those people are. I think I could figure out a couple of them.
their like personality, and that was something that helped us hold confidentiality even within the community, because you don't know like who's listening. The last thing you would want is to be, is to break someone's trust in the container.
Exactly. I mean, at the end of the day, some of the most important things that we have are the container, the relationship, and the trust that's built. Even in a setting where it is okay and warranted, even absolutely necessary to share information with other parts of this, there's still, I guess it's more of the aspirational clinical judgment of it, of, okay, I need to do that. What do I need to share? What can I hold to myself and kind of honor in our relationship? And how do I navigate the boundaries between those two things? And then one other thing too. So another unique bit about this place is that it is not an encapsulated community. There's this building here, and there is that building there. And there's the outside, and there's us taking residents to the park, and us taking them back, and maybe someone wants to go to the store, and so on and so forth, So we spend a lot of time outside the nice, safe confines of this building. If you are outside and you are with another intern or a resident, well, let's say with another intern, maybe with a wellness staff person, maybe with a care partner, maybe, I don't know. How would you maintain confidentiality in that situation? Do you talk about residents outside? If you have to, how do you talk about them? Thoughts on that?
Identifying information.
Yeah.
Just be aware of your surroundings, like don't talk about it on the bus.
Just make sure no one's, so you probably don't have, unless you really have to, it wouldn't be outside, but just make sure, whisper, or just no one can hear you. And just whatever minimal, like you said, just amount of information that you need to share.
Absolutely. Try and have your conversations inside, behind closed doors. Don't use identifying information. Go on the need to know principle. I'm gonna use that. That's gonna be what we're gonna say for this year. You watch. We'll see. Okay. Well, we should move on to talking about paperwork soon. But real quick before we do that, I just want to run through a couple of things. They're not so interesting and exotic that they require an entire conversation about them. Just more need to know sort of bits. So first off, timeliness. Quite important. Now, granted, I know that there is a unique situation in this where there is not a lot of parking, and a lot of the parking that does exist is 2-hour parking. And so because of that, for any trainings or meetings or anything like that, there is that understanding that that problem exists and some leeway could be given to that. But also, it is on the responsibility of you all to try as best as you can to also take care of this stuff in a timely fashion so that you're not running into, say, a didactic training half an hour late. You know, so as much as there is understanding and leeway, there is also responsibility for you guys to be timely as much as you possibly can be, and that's something that we can work on. The other thing I wanted to talk about are cell phones. How annoying is it if you are giving a conversation or you are an outside trainer and you come in and, you know, want to share your knowledge about something with people and everyone is looking down and tapping on their phones? Would that be annoying?
Extremely.
Right?
Definitely. What happens if you use your phone to take notes? I mean, that's the thing. I mean, you need to announce that.
That is a different sort of thing. So I mean, I suppose,
Okay.
you know, like with anything, there's always bits and pieces. If you're the kind of person that does notes in your computer or your phone, you know, if you just kind of let people know what you're doing, then it's fine. You know, but I guess it's a basic sort of respect. It's not don't be taking notes. It's don't be, I don't know,
Oh, yeah.
checking your Facebook or playing.
I think, I mean,
Flash
as a public speaker myself, it would be helpful to me if someone were to come and say, listen, I have to take my notes on my phone, so when you see me on my cell phone, that's what I'm doing. That would make me feel more comfortable. So, you know, out of respect, I would really appreciate it if I had that information. Then it wouldn't bother me. But it is extremely distracting to see people on their cell phones.
And it,
Brings up a question, because I was just writing a note to the Kaiser social worker that just before Gina had talked about. Is it then better if you have to do, you know, professional communication, you know, the texting back and forth about a client leaving in a few hours, to step out? Or since it was just a short text, better to sit? I'm just trying to get an idea there, because I just did it for 10 minutes ago.
didn't even notice.
I didn't know. So
Okay.
whatever you do, just keep
Good,
it.
I just did it.
I mean, I suppose if it's something extensive, then maybe the
Yeah.
appropriate thing to do would be to excuse yourself from the room for a bit. I mean,
I think that's the difference. If you're literally just saying, you know, I'm still in a meeting, talk later, then no one's going to notice. But if you're literally having a full-on conversation, which is, I mean, I'm sure everyone in here is like, oh, who does that? You'd be surprised. So if you're on your phone,
who
literally
sends
five
text
minutes-
throughout the entirety of an entire training to everybody sitting in the training? I don't know.
You know, so I think if it is just
Person
a short
probably doesn't
exchange,
exist
that's fine.
because that'd
you
be
know,
insane.
if you're taking notes, that's fine. But it's some people would have a whole conversation, and you see them laughing all of a sudden. It's that kind of stuff.
I just wanted to note, as somebody who's getting close to the generation that we're going to be taking care of that, and I have kids, you know, are texting. For my generation, it drives me crazy, absolutely, because we didn't grow up with it. So I would imagine that the population here also has issues with technology and understanding. But anyway, it drives me crazy. I think other people would be too.
Side point, it is very important to be sensitive about technology with this population. I've actually made that mistake before and gotten into quite a bit of like, I had really triggered someone because I was like, oh, let me just whip out my phone and look up what you need. Haha, isn't this great? I can just find anything. And it really kind of, I guess, trampled on his sense of autonomy, trampled on his sense of agency, you know, and even a little bit of a kind of, you have this thing and you understand it really well and I don't have it and I don't get it, and, you know, like it was very frustrating. So I learned to be really careful about the use of technology. Also, thank you for pointing that out, because one other thing I need to convey to you, and this, I guess, is more of an agency rule. This isn't just us. This is care partners. This is kitchen staff. These are everybody that works here. please, 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 except in, you know, necessary work situations or work emergencies, please refrain from using your phone in areas where the residents are around. Just because, I mean, it's not even what we discussed about people kind of maybe taking a chagrin to the technology. It's more of when we're around the residents, we need to be directing and focusing our attention on them, making sure that everything's going on. We're in a milieu where stuff is happening all the time, and part of that is developing this sort of peripheral sense of kind of knowing what's going on around you if you're focusing on someone. Very hard to do that when you're on your phone. Now, granted, as I said, really work-related things, you need to get a hold of someone, maybe it's an emergency or maybe it's a work call coming in that you need to step out and take, that is fine. But for the most part, please, please, please do not use your phones in the milieu. Jana would get very pissed at you if she saw it.
And also not in trainings or, you know, during group supervision or anything like that.
Okay.
There could be some exception there. For instance, I do music therapy with some residents, and I play music that they're requesting. For instance, Chinese opera for one of my residents who's Chinese. That sort of thing, then I think would be appropriate. And also
absolutely.
movement music and so on.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, using your phone with the resident is one thing, but using your phone for a personal sort of thing, yeah, exactly. It takes your attention away.
Naming it helps a lot. Like when I've had that happen, like if I've been coordinating with like someone I'm running a group with and they're bringing someone up and I'll just like name to the group, like, oh, I'm just talking to so-and-so, telling them this. It's just like when you're with your friend and they're on their phone and you're like, what are you doing? Yeah, there's this curiosity. So like if you just name it, it helps. Or like with one resident, they would watch YouTube videos of ballet and the internet didn't really reach her room because she was in like the back corner and whatever. It was just easier for me to use my phone as a hotspot, but I would like name it, like, this is what I'm doing, this is what I'm doing. And we're trying to explain the internet to her and like why the videos would stop. And that was really, really interesting. But yeah, like just naming it helps a lot. I don't know. I've noticed. Because there are times where, yeah, like you're coordinating with another intern and you need to be using technology.
Exactly. Yeah.
Or even like one of our residents I would call to remind her that we would do like more formal appointments. And that was like a better way of keeping boundaries. And I don't know, but just naming it.
Yeah.
helps.
I mean, at the end of the day, use your judgment, but, you know, just keep in mind anything that detracts from your attention to the resident, that isn't involved in the resident and isn't something related to work or services that you're providing for them, probably a good thing to do on your own time behind closed doors in some other place. Step outside, go up to the mezzanine, go down to the office if your phone has reception down there. Just not on the milieu floor.